Excellent. So our app will now work with one, two, multiple pizzas. We're currently just mocking up our API calls at the moment by saving our data in a variable. But let's now actually go ahead and make some API calls to our own server that has these pizzas on them. The pizza API is one that we've set up for you, and all it does is kind of hold some data about pizzas that you can kind of use and utilize. The way that you get to it, so let's do a bit of testing with Postman. Go ahead and open Postman on your computer, and this way we can just explore what the API actually does. And we're going to go through this slowly, so only the things that are relevant to this video will we be looking at now. Let's just have a bit of a look. In the text accompaniment underneath this video, there is a URL. Now that is the URL to the API endpoint. So in here we'll say https://react-backend.fly/API. Now, this API endpoint has got a few other endpoints in it, and the one that we're interested in is actually /pizza. So if I now send a GET request, make sure that this says GET to this endpoint here, and we send the request, we now get as a response a bunch of different objects. An ID of a pizza, Hawaiian, just there. We've got the meat feast, but we've also got a bunch of others. We've got this veggie medley, we've got a margarita, and even a diavola pizza as well, a much more hot pizza. Each of these has an ID, they've got a name, they have an image URL, a size, and is vegetarian or not. So what we really want to do is we want to kind of take these, whatever is the responses from this API, and then render a card for each of these pizzas. So we've tested this now and we know that this works. We're getting these pizzas back from this URL. Now, don't worry about this student key. You will have been emailed a student key. That's going to become important later on. But for now, you can just call this API from Postman or from your React app, and you will get always these 5 pizzas. Great, so I'm just going to move Postman out of the way, and let's now have a look at our React application. Now we're going to use Axios again. We used Axios earlier in a different lesson. And we're going to use Axios to make our calls, our API calls. At the moment, we don't actually have access to Axios. Now we could do like we did before. We could use that import link in our HTML, but that's not really a particularly good way of doing it, especially when working with a React application like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down into my terminal here, and I'm going to use Control-C, and it's Control-C on Windows and Mac to stop our React app from running. And then I'm going to use npm install Axios. Feel free to copy and paste this so that you don't make any typos. And then hit return and wait for it to do its thing. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, don't worry about these vulnerabilities. We've now got Axios installed. And we can double check that by going to our package.json, looking in the dependencies, and you can see here we have Axios. Wonderful. So let's now just go ahead and close our package.json. We don't really need to do anything in that. But what we want to do is in our pizza index, instead of having this pizzas here, we actually want to go and call the API. So all I've done is deleted that pizzas here. So we will probably end up with an error now. Oh, it will do if I do npm start to start our React app. And yes, I want to run it on a different port. And our React app is starting. And yeah, we get an error because pizzas is not defined. That's absolutely fine. So what I want everyone to do is just to right click anywhere on here and go to inspect and open the console. We can clear the console because we're going to be doing a bunch of API calls, and all we really want to do is make our API call show up in the console, because that means that we can then use it in our app. In order to suppress this error that we've got here, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out this pizzas.map here. So if I save that now, yeah, we've got no pizza cards, but that doesn't matter. We just, for now, we want to make our data show up in the console, and then we can go ahead and use it in our app. So first things first, we need to have Axios available in our pizza index. So what I'll do is I'll say import Axios from, and then Axios, because it's going to go and get it from our node modules. So import Axios from Axios. Inside our pizza index, what I want to do up here is I want to say, go and make that API call. Now, as we know from before, Axios calls are asynchronous. So we'll need an async function, and we'll call this get pizzas. That sort of makes sense to me. Parentheses and curly brackets as usual. Now in here we can then go ahead and make that Axios API request. So I'm just going to say const URL equals, and we'll have a string of the URL that we want to call. So I'm just going to paste that in there. And then we'll say const response is await Axios.get, get. And then we want to kind of go and get that URL. Let's go ahead now and console.log our response. And what we should get when we call this function, we should end up with that response printed to the console. So get pizzas. Let's save that. Go to our console, and fantastic, we've got that Axios response. You'll notice we have it twice, but let's just ignore that for the moment. Excellent. So if we use the drop down on one of these, we'll see that we've got this data on here, and in here is all of the pizzas. Fantastic. We've got the name is vegetarian, size, image, wonderful. It's all there. The reason we've got it twice is because we're using something called strict mode. Now, if we just pop into our index.js, it's because of this. Now, this is something that you would not put in a production application, but it can help with debugging. So just to prove that this is the case, I'm just going to go ahead and comment out both of these lines of code and save this. And you'll notice that we only get that call once. Don't worry too much just yet about strict mode, but just kind of know that it can make things run twice. It's not really a big issue for us at the moment, but you can turn it off if you wish. So really what we want to be able to do is hand this data down to our, if we go back to our pizza index, we want to pass this response.data down into our return here so that we can map over it and create pizza cards for every pizza. Cool. This is where it's going to get a little bit complicated because we can't just go ahead and do this. We can't just kind of save this in a variable called get pizzas or called pizzas, and return our response dot data here. So what this is doing really is it's saying return our response data, so that list or that array of pizzas, and save it in this pizzas variable here. I'm just going to go and uncomment this and refresh. You see, it's not really working the way that we'd expect. It's saying pizzas.map is not a function. And it's a bit awkward. It's a bit like this pizzas does exist. It's what's returned from here. But unfortunately, that's just not the way that React works. What we need to use is something called state. And state, we will get into it a lot more in depth later on, but state is basically kind of a hidden way of React. You can kind of store things in state and say, when this changes, I want you to kind of update stuff. Don't worry too much about it just yet. We're going to write some code and I'll talk you through what we're doing, but you will get used to it as we go on. We'll talk about it much more in depth in the next video. But for now, I just want us to kind of do it to get an idea of how this should look. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this function to run when the page loads. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that pizzas there, and also I'm just going to comment out this here again. So what we can do here is we can use something called a use effect. Now again, we'll be going into this in a lot more detail, but for now, just kind of go with it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to import use effect, and this goes in curly brackets again. I'll explain this much later, but for now we're just following the process of calling an API in a React component. So we're going to import use effect, and this goes into parentheses, from the string of React. Now this is again lowercase. I put an uppercase there, but this is lowercase. And just below this get pizzas function, what I'm going to put here, it's going to look a little bit weird, but this is kind of just the way you have to do it. We're going to say use effect. Now use effect takes a callback function. So let's write just an anonymous function in here. And inside here, we're going to say get pizzas, and we're going to call that. We're going to go into this in a lot more detail later on, but we need to add what's called a dependency array to the second argument of our use effect. And all we do is we go in between the closing curly bracket and the closing parenthesis, add a comma because it's a new argument, and add an empty array. Again, we're going to experiment with this later on. Just know that we need that empty array. And what this will do is it will run this function on kind of whenever the component loads. So it's almost like saying, when you load your component, do this. Great. So we've got our use effect running there. And what I'm going to do here actually is I'm going to say console.log use effect has run. So if I save this now and we go into our console, yep, we're still getting all of those errors, but we get use effect has run. Fantastic. This has run. Which in turn means that get pizzas must have run. Let's just confirm that. So we'll say console.log get pizzas has run. Save that. Brilliant. Use effect has run and get pizzas has run. Again, don't worry too much about these kind of running twice. It can be due to the hot update that's happening. So don't worry too much about that just yet. Fab. So we've got this response.data here, but now we need to save this in state. So inside this import statement here, we're going to import use effect, but we're also going to import use state. And at the top of our function here, we're going to say const, and then this might look a little bit weird, but we're going to say const an array of our pizzas. And then as the second element in our array, we're going to say set pizzas. And we'll set this equal to our use state. Now this is a function, so it needs parentheses. And in these parentheses, we're going to put what it should start as, whatever the default state is. Now, our pizzas is an array, but when our component loads, there should be no pizzas in that array. So what I would say is we should set it as default as an empty array. So let's just save that now. We've got a few warnings here. That's absolutely fine. But what we actually need to do is we need to use this set pizzas. You see that's yellow. This is actually a function. We need to use this set pizzas to save our pizzas into state. So instead of returning from this get pizzas function, what we're going to do is we're going to say set pizzas. It's a function, so parentheses. And we will set our pizzas as our response.data, that array of pizzas. Let's save that now. Nothing will appear on the console. Well, our use effect and our get pizzas as run will appear here. But now what I want us to do is to go and uncomment this pizzas here. Now, what you'll notice is that this has now gone from being grayed out to actually being kind of lit up again. And that's because those pizzas have now kind of been used here, and we're mapping over whatever we set this pizzas to. We set them here. So let's head over to our app. Fantastic. So if I just refresh this now, Oh, wonderful. So we've got Hawaiian, Meat Feast, Veggie Medley, Margarita, and Diavola. We've got all of these extra pizzas here that we've pulled from our API. Cool. Don't worry if this didn't make an awful lot of sense. I'm just going to quickly go over what we did, and then in the next video, or in a future video, we'll have a really deep dive into what state actually is, especially when we start looking at forms. But just for now, what I want you to remember is that in order to get something to kind of run on component load whenever a component loads, we can use this use effect and use what's called an empty dependency array to do so. Every time the component loads, when we do that, it will run whatever is inside this function here. We've also used state. And what we've done is we've set this pizzas variable to our response.data, whatever we got from that URL. We had to use the setPizzas function to do that, but this is how we got those pizzas kind of saved in this variable. We were then able to use that variable down here and map over it to create a pizza card for each of the pizzas.